Welcome to another Legacy Warriors podcast where we cover the top two feeder leagues to the UFC, which is the LFA and Cage Warriors, which actually has Cage Warriors 189 going down this weekend in Rome, Italy. And as you expect, there is a ton of Italian talent on this card, obviously headlined by Giacomo Michaelis, going up against a Cage Warriors newcomer who has some solid experience. So good test for Michaelis to see if he can make it to the next level or if he can put his name in the hat for a potential Contender Series spot later on this year. There are 18 fights on this entire card, and I've been able to find about 7 or 8 spots that I actually pulled the trigger on, and you can find those spots on the MMA LOT and Patreon page. Link for that is in the description below, or you could try to figure out what spots I'm on just by watching this breakdown here and the predictions that I got for you guys. But if you just want the notes handed straight to you and the answers handed straight to you, check out the MMA LOT and Patreon page, not just for the Cage Warriors picks, but also the UFC, which goes down Saturday night, and not to mention all the other great promotions that I cover all on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. All right. 18 fights scheduled for Saturday morning for this Cage Warriors card. I'm going to briefly go through every single one. I would love to go in depth about each one, but I don't want to be sitting here for 3 hours talking about this card. So we're going to try to see if we can get this done in a tight 20 to 30 minute span, going through overall 18 fights here for you guys. And obviously referring to my notes because it's hard to remember some of these newer guys that I studied for this card. All right, let's get right into this bad boy. First matchup up, we got Valerio Anza coming in at plus 150, going up against Alessandro Ortolani, who comes in at minus 180. Now, Anza is a fighter, or maybe not a fighter. He seems more of a hobbyist than anything. It looks like he's a nutritionist or a doctor of some sort, helping fighters with weight cuts, but he loves to get his hands dirty as well with competing, but he has not been competing all that lately. It looks like when he does compete, he tries to get into the grappling realm as soon as possible, but if he can get that quick finish, he quickly finds himself getting tapped out and strangled by his opponents as well. He's going up against Ortolani here, who seems a little bit more, more committed to the mixed martial arts game. He doesn't have the sexiest of records, but he is a guy that seems to have the well-roundedness in the mixed martial arts game. Now it's just all about leveling up and trying to accrue that experience so that he can get to the next level as well. Decent striker, decent grappler. I think he wins this fight, but both guys very flaky and very tough to trust this earlier in their career, at least for Ortolani. But Ortolani, again, way more committed to the mixed martial arts game, and I feel like he'll end up getting his hand raised, but I just can't get behind that minus 180 line. All right, next up, we got Pietro Mochetti coming in at minus 122, going up against Demetrios Tzeinaridis, who comes in at minus 105. Now, Mochetti is a guy that I primarily thought was a striker, but we saw him rely on his grappling game last time around against Johan Salvador to win that fight by decision. There were some moments where he ended up getting reversed, but he quickly got his position back and was able to get that top position and slowly chip away at Salvador en route to a decision victory. Mochetti seems most comfortable in the striking realm, but it is impressive to see him try to improve that grappling game, and that's going to come in play for him here against Tzeinaridis, butchered it, who seems to be more of a striker, but very tough to tell what he brings to the table. He's 2-1 as a pro mixed martial artist. He may have been 3-0, but he did get DQ'd in his first pro fight after head kicking his downed opponent. Seems to come from a striking background, not a whole lot of footage on him, so it's tough to tell what kind of defensive grappling we're going to see from him, and that's why I have to give the slight edge to Mochetti here. In the striking realm, this could be very competitive, and it might even go to Tzeinaridis in terms of being able to get the better of Mochetti in those spots. But I think we'll see Mochetti rely on the wrestling and grappling to keep him on the back, to keep him on his back to grind this out. But very tough to have uber confidence considering the low-level nature of this fight, but also the lack of evidence and proof and footage on the, I believe, Cyprus or, you know what, I don't want to butcher. Let me just see if I can quickly pull it up here. I want to see if I can figure out the nationality of his opponent here. I believe it was Cyprus. Let me just quickly check that. Yeah, Cyprus. So yeah, I'm going to go with Mochetti here, and I think he grinds us out. But again, very low-level fight. Tough to trust either guy. All right, next up, we got Antonino Amodeo coming in at -115, going up against Manuel Lancioli, who comes in at -115 as well. Starting off on the Amodeo side, he makes his Cage Warriors debut here after going 3-1 to start off his pro career. Looks very physical, looks very strong, and he often looks to take his opponents to the ground and strangle them on the mat. There are some technical issues in his game that has caused him defeats even in his amateur career, where he had a very mediocre run. But guys have been able to clip him. In his lone professional loss, we saw him get clubbed and subbed by his opponent. But he looks to be a guy that just relies on that physicality to just grind guys out and eventually find that TKO finish. His opponent Lancioli is similar in that aspect, but his striking seems a little bit more refined. But it also seems like Lancioli can push a pace that Amodeo might not be able to keep up with. We've seen Lancioli in some bad spots, specifically in his last fight, which is his first pro loss, but we saw him consistently putting up resistance, looking for reversals, and getting that top position. I think this will be competitive early, but I think we'll see Lancioli start to pull away with this as Amodeo starts to break and wilt under the constant resistance and pressure that Lancioli will be putting on him here. I feel weirdly confident in the spot in Lancioli, and I could be wrong, but I feel like he's much closer to his prime near as Amodeo is starting to slow down, and I don't think that Amodeo is ready for the level of resistance that he's going to be facing from Lancioli, something that we saw him falter against in his amateur days. He's been running over some of the easier guys in his pro days, but Lancioli will be the best professional fighter he's fought to date, and I think he'll show as Lancioli finishes him in the second or third round. Our next up, we got Emmanuel Tetti coming in at at -300, going up against Rodrigo Rivoin, who comes in at +250. Now, big action coming in on Rivoin as he was closer to +425 just yesterday, and now steady action coming in, bringing him down to that +250 range. I wouldn't even be surprised if it gets even closer by fight time. Both these guys are strikers. Tetti comes from a kickboxing background. Rivoin comes from a Muay Thai background, but Tetti is slowly starting to, round out his mixed martial arts game. We saw him put in some bad grappling positions last time around against a fighter that seemed to gas himself out halfway through that fight, and that allowed Tetti to showcase some of his defensive grappling improvements, showcasing good rear naked choke defense, getting out of bad positions, reversing positions, and then eventually getting back to the feet, where he often shows a little bit of a flashy kickboxing style. Rivoin is a fighter going down to 125 pounds, and you can see how big he could be for this weight class, and that could potentially cause Tetti some trouble. Rivoin is nasty with his elbows and his knees in that Muay Thai clinch. He's obviously improving his grappling game, which has led to the majority of his losses as a pro. And even though he has a salty 2-3 record, this is a guy that might just be waiting to, really blast onto the scene once he's really gotten this experience under his belt. Not to mention, as an amateur from the ages of 18 to 20, he was 9-3. Now, as a 23-year-old, as of next month, this is a kid that's slowly starting to grow into his body and starting to mature, and we're starting to see that strength start to catch up to his game. I think this will be a very competitive matchup. This is a fight that I feel could end up being a coin flip. I don't see Tetti looking to exploit the grappling defense of Rivoin. If this ends up being just a purely striking contest, I have to lean with the Peruvian ever so slightly. So at +250, I think he's a no-brainer spot to end up winning this fight. And I have to give a shout out to one of my commenters on my UFC breakdown who had pointed this spot out even before I got to it. He got in much earlier at +425. I had to settle for about +260 in this spot, but I still think it's a good enough spot to take a shot on. I think this is going to be a tougher matchup for Tetti than the odds indicate, and I think we'll see the Peruvian pull off the upset and win this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, we got Francesco Tumminiello coming in at -900, going up against Umberto Di Munno, who comes in at +600. Not going to spend too long on this fight. This is a squash match, even though there is no pro or amateur experience in mixed martial arts for Tumminiello. It looks like he comes from a solid kickboxing background. He's been training in mixed martial arts for the past several years, whereas Di Munno 0-4 as a pro fighter. Seems to be an out-of-shape guy, if I'm being honest. He might land a few takedowns here as Tumminiello starts to get comfortable, but then it's just a matter of time before Tumminiello starts to put his combinations together and get Munno out of there within a round and a half. All right, I'm very excited for this one. This should be a low-key banger between Enrico De Gangi, who comes in at -170, going up against Gary Rooney, who comes in at +140. Now, De Gangi has stuffed a ton of experience into his 7 pro fight career. He's fought some very tough competition, including Alessandro Giordano, who is going to be rematching Liam Gittins for the title in a few months here, and De Gangi actually defeated Giordano. Also, De Gangi has come up short against 2 guys, Scott Harvey and Harry Shaw, over his last 2 fights. 2 undefeated fighters, very close fights, and De Gangi could have won that fight against Shaw as it was a split decision loss for him. He is a guy that likes to implement his wrestling, top control, and good control just overall. His striking leaves a lot to be desired, but he does a great job in terms of bridging that gap and eventually getting fights to the ground and getting to his grind. He also has a solid cardio game, so he can go 15 minutes if he needs to pretty easily. He's going up against Gary Rooney here, who had a very solid amateur record going 13-4. He's now 2-1 as a pro, BJJ black belt under John Kavanagh over there at SPG Ireland, and it's obvious what he wants to do. He tries to take opponents to the ground, get to his grappling game ASAP, although I'm not all that impressed with his ability to control opponents. He's also one of those fighters that believes in their BJJ to the point that they're willing to, lose minutes on the clock, giving up control, hoping to pull off a reversal off their back or eventually a submission so he can reverse that spot, lock up a submission and force a tap against his opponents. He usually pushes a decent pace, but I think his wrestling still needs a little bit of work, and I think that's where De Gangi is going to have a little bit of an edge. I could see this going to a split, so I wouldn't bang on anybody looking to take a shot on Rooney here at +140, but I think that De Gangi slowly grinds these positions out, accrues more top time, gets more damage off, controls more positions, fights off the submission attempts of Rooney, and eventually wins this fight on the scorecards. But at -170, I'm willing to pass, unless there's crazy money that comes in on Rooney before the fight here that pushes this more to a pick-em price. I'll probably stay away from this matchup, but I do like De Gangi here to grind this fight out. All right, next up, we got Fabio Condidorio going up against Salvatore Bellotta, who comes in at -145. A matchup between 2 grinders. Now, Condidorio put together a 4-9 amateur run, mainly looking to grind his opponents against the cage, take them to the ground, not doing that great of a job in terms of passing into more dominant positions, but rather just working from that full guard position where he's able to land some shots here and there, try to keep fights on the ground. There are plenty of fights where I saw referees just stand him up because he's just not advancing to more dominant positions, and then he eventually just gets his opponents to the ground immediately again. He's strong, he's physical. He started his amateur career 0-6, ended up finishing at 4-4, and the guys that he ended up losing to in that 4-4 run actually had a combined record of 22-1. So some stellar competition he was going up against there. But again, I am not impressed with his lack of ability to get to better positions, and I think that's where we see him come up short against some of these guys that are able to either reverse position, catch him in a submission after he goes for a desperation takedown, or even start to put him on the back foot where he doesn't seem to be all that comfortable. And I think that's what he's facing here in Salvatore Bellotta, who turned pro back in March, found a first-round submission victory to start off on the right foot, and he actually went 6-0 as an amateur as well from 2019 to 2024. He has a well-rounded game, seems to have a solid understanding of the grappling realm, but also has some good striking too. And I think that's where he's really going to start to pressure Condidorio and get him uncomfortable. I think Bellator can be competitive in the grappling realm early, but as we see him start to throw up submissions, look for reversals, quickly work back to his feet, we'll see Condidorio start to slow down, start to break, start to wear down, and I think that's where Bellator will start to pull away, and I don't mind this -145 line on him either. All right, next up, we got Matteo Martignoni coming in at minus 220, going up against Luca Tarabori, who comes in at plus 180. Now, Martignoni came in as a big favorite last time around and ended up losing to Damon Donald, who not a lot of people knew about at the moment. But now a lot of people know exactly who Donald is. So I think if they reline that fight, Martignoni may have been the underdog, but you can't overlook the power that he brings to the table, which is why he's been able to finish both of his pro wins thus far. I think when he fights superior strikers, that's where we'll see him start to fade a little bit, but he has decent grappling defense, and it's all about the power striking for him. And I think that's what's going to help him or buoy him to a victory here against a BJJ brown belt in Luca Tarabori. Tarabori does not look like all that good of a fighter. He's 3-1 as a pro, but those are fights against guys that he's been easily able to take to the ground, either find submissions or just grind them out. But there have been fights where, his takedowns don't really work, and then he kind of looks lost on the feet, allowing opponents to kind of dictate the pace and then draw desperation takedowns that they're easily able to stuff. Tarabori, even his control from top position, not that good. He often gets reversed and ends up fighting off of his back, where he's just a little bit too comfortable, allowing opponents to just grind him out from that top position. I'd be very surprised if Martignoni follows him to the ground here. I think Matteo will do a good enough job in terms of keeping this upright, punishing Tarabori on the feet, and then I think he eventually finishes him within a round and a half. Minus 220 I think is a little generous, and I think people are kind of low on Matteo because of the last performance against Donald, but I think he'll remind people that he can go out there and squash tomato cans, and that's exactly what he's facing this weekend in Luca Tarabori. All right, next up, we got Kevin Caperna coming in at plus 180, going up against Gabriel Lionetti, who comes in at minus 220. Now, Caperna was able to pull off a big upset last time around against Jordan Molinari in a matchup where he let his striking advantage talk for the first 60 to 70% of the round before his opponent was finally able to get the fight to the ground, but not do enough damage to outdo the work that Caperna was doing while they were striking. Caperna went 1-10 as an amateur. He was 1-1 going into his last matchup, hence why he was a big underdog. But I think he needs to keep fights in the striking realm so that he can get off on some of these combinations, let go with his calf kicks, and try to damage his opponents that way. He's just a little slow. He's not all that athletic, and I think that's where he's going to come up short against guys that are better strikers than him, which is what he's facing this weekend against Gabriel Lionetti. Lionetti went 3-1 as an amateur, now turning his attention to the pro ranks. He's a guy that has entrenched himself at Tiger Muay Thai, really rounding out his Muay Thai game even more. Even though he hasn't competed in mixed martial arts since 2023, he's been taking a ton of Muay Thai fights, and I think we'll see those skills put on display here against Caperna. Caperna's grappling is not all that good, so it lets me believe that Lionetti should be able to keep this fight upright, and then from there I think he's just a more refined striker. It might be competitive in certain spots and certain pockets, but I think for the most part we'll see Lionetti land with a little bit more speed, a little bit more pop, and I think just his athleticism advantage will allow him to land more damage, and that should allow him to get the decision victory over a tough Kevin Caperna. Next up, we got Luca Borando coming in at minus 400, going up against Jan Masek, who comes in at plus 300. Now, Borando suffered his first professional loss mid last year against a very strong and physical Matthew Elliott, who was able to just nullify him on the ground. And, Borando had his spots, but ultimately it was Elliott who was able to get his hand raised. Borando did bounce back with a dominant performance against Nikolai Mezdria back in November, grinding him out until he eventually found that finish in the third round of their fight. He's an all-around fighter, strong, physical, likes to get to the grappling when he can, or he can just pepper his opponents from distance if he finds an advantage in that realm. He's going up against Masek, who pulled off an upset last time around, defeating a very tough fighter who I can't remember off the top of my name. I remember he was a Great Britain top team prospect training under Brad Pickett, but Masek was able to stop the takedowns, outland him on the feet, utilizing his flashy kickboxing style, usually putting in some spinning stuff and some nasty combinations, great head kicks as well. He had a very abysmal amateur career, but he's slowly starting to put the game together, especially as his defensive grappling starts to improve. We'll see him be a little bit more free in the striking realm, where he puts on a very consistent pace that not a lot of opponents can usually keep up with. Unfortunately for Masek, still a little young, still growing into his body, still trying to gain that strength, and I think that's going to be the detriment to him here against Borando, who I believe can dictate the pace of this matchup. I think we'll see Borando do a good job in terms of pushing Masek up against the cage, utilizing some dirty boxing, some knees up the middle, even landing a few takedowns and getting some control time. At distance, Masek could have some success here, so I can't bang on anybody looking to take that plus 300, but I still feel Borando will be the one in control. He'll be the one in the driver's seat, and that will allow him to just control this fight, get the clinch, get the takedowns, get the control, and eventually grind this fight out, winning it on the scorecards. All right, next up we got Giuseppe Mastrogiacomo coming in at minus 400, going up against Mervin Gencer, who comes in at plus 300. Now, there's been steady action coming in on Gencer, who was closer to plus 700, I believe it was, or even plus 600, and he's dropped down to plus 300 because people can see where he might be able to take advantage of Mastrogiacomo. Now let's talk about Mastrogiacomo, who suffered his first pro loss last time around, as I thought he took a little bit too big of a step up in competition, going up against a veteran in Aiden Lee, who was quickly able to get the back of the Taekwondo specialist and eventually find that submission, forcing the tap. Mastrogiacomo is best when he can establish that Taekwondo style, utilizing his range and footwork management, touching opponents up from distance, putting together some solid combinations, maybe finding those finishes, but also being comfortable going 15 minutes and edging these guys out on the scorecards. It's the grappling where we really need to see him start to put things together, especially from a defensive perspective, so he doesn't find himself in another position against like he was when he fought Aiden Lee. But again, I just thought that was too big of a step up for Mastrogiacomo, who is still trying to find himself in the mixed martial arts world. Now, he's going up against a 32-year-old 4-1 fighter here who's riding a 3-fight winning streak. Gencer has some decent striking, crisp strikes down the pipe, usually pressures his opponents very well, countering them effectively, then getting to his BJJ when he can. The issue is he's just gone up against very low level of competition, and I think this will be the best fighter that he's faced to date. But I think he could rise to the occasion. You know, this is a spot where he could counter Mastrogiacomo's blitz attacks by countering with straight shots down the pipe, and maybe even engaging in the clinch, where he might be able to get some minutes off the clock, controlling Mastrogiacomo against the cage. I still lean with the Italian fighter here. I think Mastrogiacomo will do a good enough job in terms of getting the space that he needs to get off on his offense. But given how wide the odds were before, you know, this was a spot that I felt like you can get some decent value on Gencer when you're able to get him in that, you know, plus 400, plus 500 range. Mastrogiacomo is now coming down to that minus 300 range, which is where I think that should have been lined to begin with. But don't be surprised if Gencer pulls off the upset here. But in terms of an official prediction, I'll still go with Mastrogiacomo. All right, next up, Nicolas Leblond coming in at minus 250, going up against Matthias Brauns. Matthias is not Polish. He's actually a Brazilian fighter, so it's Matthias. Brauns coming in at plus 200. Now, Leblond started his Cage Warriors career 1-2, but has really dialed things in now and is 5-0 in his last 5 fights. He's finished all but one of them, which was his last opponent, who took the fight on super short notice, but was a very awkward and unorthodox fighter. Leblond utilized his striking and his grappling, the full package, to end up getting his hand raised on the scorecards there. In the past, Leblond has utilized a grapple-heavy approach, but it seems like he's being a little bit more calculated with his striking, picking opponents apart and finding those big shots to put them away. He's been scheduled twice now to fight champion Shaj Hack, but both those fights have fallen through for various reasons. Now Leblond is forced to fight a fighter that has competed for LFA in the past and seems to be a decent prospect himself. I came across Brauns last time around when he fought for LFA, which was his last fight over 2.5 years ago, and he came up short against a very tough Marciano Ferreira. Brauns is a long, lanky Muay Thai specialist who is slowly improving his BJJ game, where he currently holds a purple belt. When he really gets comfortable at distance, he can let go on some combinations, good elbows and knees when he can get in on the clinch, but it's really been his defensive grappling that has put him in some bad spots. It almost seems he's a little bit too overconfident off of his back with his BJJ, which is why opponents have been able to grind him out and keep him on his back, because he's almost willing to be there, hoping that he can throw up something and catch him in a submission. I think he's going to struggle to do that here against Leblond, who I think has good enough striking to wade his way through the range of Brauns and land some big shots of his own. Not to mention that Brauns has also been out of the cage for 2.5 years. This is a very tough opponent to take upon his return, traveling across the pond, long layoff, going up against a guy that's clearly in his prime right now. I'm not going to completely call this a write-off and say Brauns is just going to go out there and just bend over and just allow Leblond to do whatever the hell he wants. I think that we'll see Leblond face a little bit of adversity, but I think we'll see eventually Leblond getting more control time, some good grappling, some good striking off, and I think that'll allow him to win this fight on the scorecards. But minus 250, just a little bit too wide for my liking. All right, next up, we got Giuseppe Ruggeri coming in at minus 800, going up against Nicholas Barna, who comes in at plus 550. Now, starting off on the Ruggeri side of things, he successfully bounced back from his first pro loss by landing a nasty knockout victory over Orlando Wilson Prince. He was unsuccessful in the first round with getting his grappling going, which is often where he wears his opponents down and keeping them on their back, but he also has some heavy fists, which he put on display last time around against Prince. I want to see him continue to improve his cardio management, because I believe that's the reason he ended up having that first loss to Omari Jr. a couple fights back. But if he can continue to just trust his hands a little bit more and trust that the takedowns would come behind it, or at least landing a big enough shot that he can finish his opponents, he needs to find that happy medium in terms of not letting the gas tank go too early, but also implementing an aggressive enough game to take advantage of some of the physical advantages he has over his opponents, but also the power that he brings to the table. Now, he's going up against Barna, who's 2-3 over his last 5 fights. He's making his Cage Warriors debut here after building on looking to build upon a June submission victory over an opponent back in his native of Uruguay. Looks to be a mediocre fighter all around. Can be out grappled, can be outstruck. Not that great. His last 2 wins are against layups. He did beat a guy that was 19-11, but that fighter was 43 at the time, so it makes sense as to why that victory happened. I expect Ruggeri to grind Barna out here, not so much at a minus 800 clip. I think Barna has some decent skills that he could possibly put up some resistance and a fight of his own. But I think for the most part, we'll see Ruggeri in the driver's seat, grind this fight out. But I'd be a little bit skeptical about that minus 800 chalk, so I'd rather pass more than anything in this fight. All right, next up, we got Kadeem Dia coming in at minus 400, going up against George McManus, who comes in at plus 300. Now, Dia joined Cage Warriors back in mid-2023 and is now 4-0 with the promotion, but 6-0 overall. He's finished 2 of his 4 Cage Warriors opponents, as well as 4 of his total 6 wins. He's large and lanky, but mostly utilizes that to get to his BJJ background, where he's often been able to take opponents to the ground and smother them. We've seen him actually get taken down and controlled early in fights, but done a great job in terms of battling back from adversity and getting fights back into his realm, where he's able to control fights, land big shots from the top position, or even end up looking for a submission. Last time around, he defeated a very experienced Leon Aliu after a tough first round. He was able to batter Aliu in the second round and force him to quit on the stool after that round. I'd like to see Dia continue to improve his wrestling skills. He's big, he's strong, he has that gangly strength. If he can continue to morph that with his wrestling, I think we'll see him a lot more successful as he continues to take steps up in competition. He's going up against George McManus, who was able to cash a big underdog ticket on last time around, as he was able to pull off the submission victory over his opponent. But that was one of those weird scenarios where he got the tap, but the referee didn't see. Luckily, once the round ended, they went to a replay and reviewed it, and they actually ended up giving McManus the submission win there. Good win for him. McManus is a grappler that wants to try to create scrambles and look for submissions. He's has a salty 4-4 record, but the guys that he's losing to are Ian Machado Gary, Oban Elliott, and former tough competitor Omran Shaban. So he's come up short against some very stiff competition. But I think this is a guy that relies on that early ability to put opponents in bad spots and either break them so he can grind them out for the rest of the fight or eventually find a submission. But if he's going up against another guy that can compete in the grappling realm, that's where we see him slowly start to break as fights start to get into deeper water. And I expect that's what's going to happen with him here against Kadeem Dia. This will be competitive early. And we could see McManus have some glimpses of success early. But as his fight starts to wear on, look for Dia's strength and BJJ background to start pulling off, and I think that will see him start to get more success as this fight gets into deeper water. I like the over and a half around even money. I think this sprinkles into the second and third rounds, and either Dia gets a late finish or he grinds this out and wins it on the scorecards. All right, next up, squash match here, and we're already at the 30-minute mark. This is crazy. I thought I was being pretty efficient with these breakdowns, but here we are. All right, Paddy McCrory minus 1,500 going up against Shuki Faraj, who comes in at plus 700. No need to spend too much time on this. McCrory was supposed to fight last event. His opponent pulled out on fight day. They bring in Faraj here to just get McCrory busy. I expect McCrory to just pummel him quickly, get this fight done under 1.5. You can get that at minus 165 at the time of this recording. I'd much rather take that than the minus 1,500 on the McCrory line here, but I expect McCrory to make short work of Faraj and put him away, probably submitting him within the first round. All right, next up, we got Nicolo Soli coming in at minus 270 going up against Sulo Halaj, who comes in at plus 220. Now, Soli is coming up on almost 2 years away from action. He joins the Cage Warriors ranks after going 3-2 with Bellator. All but one of his pro fights were actually under the Bellator banner, often competing whenever they would travel to Europe. He's a decent fighter, comes from a Muay Thai background, most effective when he can control fights at range and start letting go with combinations. His ground game is slowly improving, but I can't, tell how much improvements he's been making during this time off. Decent Italian fighter, relatively speaking, to the rest of the, talent level that we normally see coming out of that country. For Halaj, it's been over a year since we've seen him in action. Makes his Cage Warriors debut here after spending the majority of his career in Greece. Trained at Bangtan Muay Thai for a while. Looks to be a little bit of a brawler who throws big power. Looks to get fights to ground and try to get ground and pound from his opponents there. But again, really questioning his ceiling because of the level of competition he fought in Greece. And I think now that he's fighting a real fighter in Soli, things could get pretty sour for him pretty quickly. The issue that I have here with Soli at Shock, we saw him get knocked out in his last fight, and Halaj definitely has the power to land that big shot and put him away. But Soli is the better mixed martial artist here. I think his defensive grappling is good enough to keep this fight upright. I think he picks apart Halaj and eventually finishes him, but I just can't trust him because of that layoff. The chalk is a little bit too heavy, and again, maybe his durability is a little shot now. Romain Debien was not this crazy good fighter, and Sula Halaj is not a crazy good fighter either, but we know in mixed martial arts, one shot could change the tide of a fight, hence why this is a stay-away fight for me. All right, co-main event now where we got Simone Diana coming in at minus 145 going up against Ryan Shelley, who comes in at plus 115. Now, Diana went 0-2 with Bellator and now is slowly picking up steam over his last 5 fights where he's gone 4-1. That lone defeat came at the hands of Jordan Vucenic, who was quickly signed to the UFC after that, so we can cut him some slack there. Diana is a guy that likes to utilize his grapple-heavy approach, taking opponents to the ground and breaking them, and eventually either getting that finish later on or grinding fights out and winning it on the scorecards. He has sneaky takedown attempts, good back takes as well, but there have been fighters who have been able to shut down his grappling, and then in the striking realm, he seems a tad lost. He's not horrible in the striking realm, but clearly not that comfortable, and if he can get to his wrestling, you see him start to wilt a bit, hence why all of his losses have actually come by finish. Now he's going up against Ryan Shelley, who started his career 6-0 and is now 1-3 over his last 4 fights. It seems like once he couldn't get past Tobias Harila and Jordy Backies, Cage Warriors is kind of looking at him more as a launching pad for guys to get to the next level. But I still think he has good enough skills to provide some issues against guys like Simone Diana. At his best, Shelley utilizes a karate style from distance where he picks opponents apart and has some good shots from there, but he also has some sneaky submissions up his sleeve where he's been able to submit some opponents whenever they go for desperation takedowns. He's shown some decent defensive grappling in the past, even when he defeated Matthew Elliott back in mid-2022. We know Elliott as a very strong and physical grappler, and we saw Shelley, on the defensive for most of that fight, but even while playing defense, he was landing damage, and I think that was ultimately why he ended up winning that fight. And I don't want to completely write him off. He's still 28 years old, so he has a chance to turn things around and really get to the next level, and this is a matchup where he can show those skills off. This is a fight where Shelley was plus 200 just yesterday, and it's clear that the betting public is all over him now, pushing him down to that plus 115 line. I think we'll see Diana have some early success with his grappling, but as Shelley continues to muster up the resistance, it'll get harder for Diana to get those takedowns, and from there, Shelley should start to pick him apart from distance, either find that finish or get that submission victory as Diana goes for a desperation takedown and gets himself caught in a submission. I don't mind the under 2.5 here at plus money either. I think Shelley wins. You're already getting plus money on his money line, but I think Shelley gets the finish probably late second round, early third round. All right, that brings us to the main event now between Giacomo Michaelis, who comes in at minus 300, going up against Sado Ukar, who comes in at plus 240. Now, Michaelis is riding a 4-fight winning streak and headlines a Cage Warriors event for the first time, and he's 3-0 with the promotion and shows some gradual improvements every single time out. Last time he took on a veteran in Oli Santalahadi in a very closely contested fight that could have gone either way. Round 1 to me was a bit of a toss-up, and I leaned ever so slightly to the Michaelis side. Round 2 was clearly for Santalahadi, and then round 3, I thought Santalahadi thought he did enough in the first 2 rounds and kind of let Michaelis just grind out the rest of that fight. And unfortunately for Santalahadi, Michaelis was the one that ended up getting his hand raised there. Michaelis is a guy that is still improving his striking game. When he has his success, it mainly looks like him grinding his opponents out and establishing that top position. It's just all about accruing solid experience now. Seeing some of the tough spots he found himself against Santalahadi, I hope that the Cage Warriors promotion is not pushing him too quickly here to try to get to the Contender Series, just as I thought they did with Will Curry when he wasn't ready for it, and we saw what happened with Curry last season. Maybe the same thing happens with Michaelis, especially if he ends up getting the victory this weekend. Now, he's going up against Ukar, who missed the entirety of 2024, dealing with the shoulder injury and the recovery from it, and he is 36 years old. He's a Turkish fighter, likes to utilize his BJJ black belt by taking opponents to the ground and looking to submit them, but is also a guy that has been can-crushing for the majority of his career. Excluding the 3-fight winning streak that he currently finds himself on, the combined record of his opponents at the time of fighting them was 48 and 103. Absolutely atrocious. 15 of his 20 wins are against guys with records of 500 or worse. And, it goes to show when he gets inside the cage. He's very active off his back with his submissions, very good with controlling opponents when he actually gets that top control. But I think he's, shoulder injury, recovering from that, the long layoff, getting up there in age. I think the cards are kind of stacked against him here, against Giacomo Michaelis, who I think can get the better of him in those grappling exchanges. But again, you can't overlook the experience advantage of Ukar, not to mention the BJJ black belt he has as well. So I do like Michaelis to win this fight. Odds are just too wide for my liking. I would prefer closer to maybe minus 185, minus 150 for Michaelis. But I think, headlining the card in his home country, seeming like the guy that Cage Warriors is pushing here, seems like this is a spot made for Michaelis to get the win, but you have to take odds into consideration, and I just don't think he's worth the 75% indicated in this fight. But I'll still pick him to win by decision. All right. There you guys go. Cage Warriors 189 broken down. I believe it starts at 8:30 Central Time, 10:30 Eastern time in the morning, and it's a bit of an appetizer to the UFC card that goes on later on in the day. Yeah, that's pretty much a wrap on this breakdown here. I'll be dropping the Lockheed Two-Step / Lockheed Trinity segment for UFC Vegas 107 in a few hours. Stay tuned for that. Otherwise, good luck on all your action this weekend, folks, and I pretty sure I will see you guys on Sunday, as I should be back on schedule now that I'm settled back in at the new place to drop the next UFC breakdown. I believe that is going to be for the UFC pay-per-view, UFC 316, the only event I'll be covering next week. So stay tuned for that. See you guys then. Peace.